Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Doug Hensch. Those of you who have watched the show know that LinkedIn Live poses questions to thought leaders and doers like Doug who are making our world better. Grace Under Pressure reveals what's too often called the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment we exert toward others. And when you do it as a leader, as Doug is, it means you pull people together in challenging times and you energize the organization. Welcome, Doug. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, John. Always nice to speak with you.
Great. Well, I want to tell our audience all about you. Doug Hensch is, Doug Hensch brings a wealth of experience and passion to the work he provides. He's an executive coach and former corporate executive. And I just learned out a former college quarterback, which we will talk about. Doug's philosophy guided him to a leadership position at Nextel Communications, where he led the e-care effort and saved the company lots of money and gained good public exposure, a good exposure for the company. Doug, as an executive coach, has worked with many leading business executives. And get this, folks, Dr. Martin Seligman, the Fox Leader professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania and the father of positive psychology, referred to Doug as one of his most talented young colleagues. Whoa, that should be written in stone. Dr. Seligman is a world leading authority and has made the world better with all his great thoughts. So Doug's a great coach and and an author, and we're going to talk about his work. So Doug, welcome.
Thanks, John. And let's be clear. Dr. Seligman said that a long time ago. As you can see from my gray hair, I'm not a young colleague anymore.
You're young by my standards. So, hey, we're in our second year of the pandemic, and you work with lots of executives. What are you hearing, and what do you advise the folks you work with, Doug?
Great question. I can't believe it. We're entering the second year, John. It's sad. It's something we probably do need to grieve about and take stock with. I will tell you, I've been fortunate to work with companies where working from home is not a problem. So my clients have really weathered the storm to date. Mm-hmm. I do not work with the hotel industry, the restaurant industry, first responders. And I think about them every day because those people who have to show up at a location, interact with other people. I mean, do you remember what it was like back in March and April?
No.
I was going to Wegmans and I'm profusely thanking the cashiers for showing up, minimum wage and that type of thing. So my heart goes out to them. It's just been a really, really tough year.
You said something that we don't often talk about, but it's important. You said we should grieve. Expand on that a minute. So,
I don't want a false sense of optimism. I don't believe in fake it till you make it. Mm-hmm. And this idea, hey, everything will be okay. I think that's where we get in trouble. And I think it's okay to sit with your negative emotions, be with them, be curious about them, and then make a decision on, what's next for me? What can I do to get out of this situation?
Right. That's wise counsel. We need to, each of us at his or her own pace. And when it comes to grief, it may not happen. I mean, we're not talking about necessarily the loss of a loved one, but the loss of our way of life. And while it may not hit us immediately, at some point, we need to acknowledge it. Would you not agree, Doug?
Absolutely. If we bury these emotions, they just come back to haunt us another time. They come out of our behavior. Yeah.
Which gets us to our topic, because as we're in tough times, and this is a subject that you've written about and personally, resilience. Tell us how you came to your own beginning to explore the topic of resilience. So.
You're going to force me to talk about football, aren't you? I don't normally talk about this. It's been so long. It's been 30 years, right, since I actually strapped a helmet on. But I played football in college. And in fact, John, you and I were talking, before we started recording about Tom Brady. And I think the big difference between Tom Brady and everybody else is how resilient he is. For me, it was the opposite story. I had some good physical tools. I had some good coaches. I had great talent around me, but I couldn't get out of my own way.
So you're saying you're better than Tom Brady?
Not a chance. Not a chance.
I'm going to put you on the spot. You can hate me. That's all right.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. But let's be honest. He doesn't have the physical tools of many of the quarterbacks that he goes up against.
What, you don't think running a 5.6 40 is good?
Well, just go back and look at the Super Bowl against the Eagles when he scrambled in the fourth quarter. I cringed and I had to look away because at 5.6, I think he was running a 7 flat. In my opinion.
Right. No, and that's a good story. It's not to knock Tom, of course, or anything, right. But and who would care if we did? Not him. But anyway, but that's a good story because, and I'm glad you mentioned it. He is not as physically gifted as others who play the game, but that certainly has not stopped him. So.
Yeah, I don't know if you've watched Ted Lasso on Apple TV.
My favorite show of 2020, without a doubt.
John, I want to be Ted Lasso. And what third episode or something, he turns to the young African player and says to him, "I want you to be like a goldfish." Right? Remember that?
Yes.
It's the shortest memory. And that is one of the secrets to Tom Brady. Just a short memory. Hey, the past is the past. I'm not going to live there.
That's right. So you had some hard knocks, and then so tell us about resilience and why it's important for us, especially now.
So it's important because again, I'll be paraphrasing from Marty Seligman when I got a chance to work with him. He referred to resilience as your ability to remove. He's a big gardener, right? And he's got a big rose garden in his backyard, and he refers to life is kind of like the weeds. The roses are our goals. These are our aspirations, the places we want to go. And resilience is that ability to pull the weeds out. And so that the roses can flourish. And I look at that as every life is going to encounter setbacks and adversity. How you deal with it is how well your roses are going to grow in your life.
Before we explore further, you have a good take on it. So what are the mistakes we make about building resilience?
I think there's a fair amount of them. I would say one of the biggest ones, as I think about even the last year, maybe beyond that, is that we spend too much time considering the cognitive part of this and the emotional part of it. And it's very difficult to be resilient if you are not getting enough exercise, if you're not getting enough quality sleep, not just the 7 to 8 that they say, but it's got to be quality sleep. And then there's the eat right. You've got to have a healthy diet. And I think when those are in place, you're in a better place to change how you think and how you frame adversity.
I think that's I'm glad you touched on that. A few of our guests have talked about the physicality, and I'm glad you talked about the cognitive, because the work that we do, and I would bet most of the folks watching this show, we all live on our cognitive. And as a result of that, that's fine. It's enjoyable. It's what we want to do, but we forget our physicality. And I always draw an analogy with pets. When our pets are ill, what do? They go in a corner and ride it out. What do? Oh, I'm going to tough it out. But you talk more proactively, eating, sleeping, right? I mean, duh, but it's so obvious we forget it.
John, I just read a study from, I think it was published maybe a month ago, that says simply laying down for 10 minutes and closing your eyes may be, I don't want to overstate this, but it may be as refreshing as a full-on nap that's 25, 30 minutes long. And so I take the time to do that. I focus on those 3 things.
I've done that myself. I often take these, maybe the word is power nap. Nothing with me is a power at my life stage with my arthritic knees. But it is good. Yes, it is kind of like maybe a jolt of caffeine, but better for you, I think. Energizes us. So, okay. So what lessons of resilience can we apply now when we're all isolated? So.
I think one of the cornerstones of resilience is mindfulness. right? And look, as a coach, we're all steeped in mindfulness and being curious. I like to think, by the way, of curiosity and mindfulness is almost kissing cousins, right? I think there's some crossover between the two. And we've got to, just pause and take stock. And I think, when I go back to, one of the elements from your book too is gratitude. Things may not necessarily be as bad as we think they are. Now, I'm not belittling anybody. We talked about restaurant workers and people who've lost their jobs and companies have closed. However, I would argue that you could find 3 good things in any day, no matter how bad the day was. And gratitude is, it's studied so much, I think it's boring to a lot of research psychologists. Mm-hmm. It's still a stalwart. It's a go-to for me every night before I go to bed. 3 good things and why they happened, and I'm falling asleep.
Right. Well, 2 of my colleagues, your colleagues, Chester Elton and Adrian Gostick, have published a book last year called Leading with Gratitude, which talks about, it's also organizationally a powerful tool that, guess what, actually makes people want to come to work and improves the bottom line. So yes, expressing a sense of gratitude. And I think one of the things about it is that we take it for granted. So.
Yeah, agreed.
And that's the challenge, I think, that we, perhaps with resilience too, that we overlook our own strengths. Do you have a thought on that, Doug?
I think living and working in your strengths is certainly a strategy for being more resilient, reaching your goals, living a happier life of satisfaction. And we are trained, I think, from day one to fix our weaknesses. So identifying your strengths, the things that you value, the things that you really like to do, absolutely is I do think it can contribute to goal achievement, to self-efficacy, and being more resilient. When we are working and living in our strengths, we're also, I think, experiencing a higher level of positive emotions, which also boosts. So, happiness and positive emotions are a resource for us. So I'm in complete agreement.
Great. Now I want to dig a little more deeply on some ideas that you have taught and coached, and I think they contribute to resilience. And the first one is creating habits, not taking up smoking and drinking, but positive habits. So anyway, so how do habits contribute to self-awareness, Doug?
How do habits contribute to self-awareness? I think there might be a little bit of an upward spiral where the habit, the self-awareness can contribute to building a habit, and then that habit reinforces the self-awareness.
Sure.
So
my misphrasing, not you.
No, it's all good. In fact, as coaches, we start working with an executive, and what's one of the first things we do is, well, what do you want to work on, right? What's your goal? There's nothing wrong with goals, but let's think about it this way, right? If I decide to run a marathon, I might say, okay, I'm going to get up, and I'm way out of shape. I might get up and I want to, I'm going to go walk a couple miles today, right? Okay, and then I'll walk a couple more, and you know what? I'm going to jog for 100 yards every mile, and I'm going to build myself up. And within a year, I get my 26.2 in. So I get that in on a Saturday morning. Achieve my goal. The next day, hey Doug, you going to go for a run? Oh, I'm aching. I gotta take a day off. Hey, Monday, Doug, you going for a run? I'm still pretty sore. Wednesday, Thursday, right? So my advice more recently in the last couple of years is, let's keep our goals. Let's talk about what habits we can put in place that when you achieve the goal, you are still building and you are still growing. So I do think that the more that we focus on habits, we can build self-awareness and resilience as well.
You touched on something which is a topic that I like, and with your example of the marathon, and that's knowing your limits. So for example, if someone says, I want to climb Everest, well, how about a hill first? So do we sometimes need to scale back our aspirations or our goals?
Yeah, John, I'm a believer in realistic optimism. So if we were to plot this on a graph, right, maybe all the way on the left is the completely pessimistic person, on the right is the optimistic thinker. And by the way, I don't like to think of people as I like to think of them as optimistic thinkers and pessimistic thinkers, because we can change that. Somewhere towards the right, get closer to the optimistic thinking without going all the way, because overly optimistic that's where you get injured trying to climb Mount Everest, right? You know, I had a client who her boss bumped into me in the hallway and said, "You know the problem with her? This is going to be fun. She wakes up every morning thinking about the things that can go right, and I wake up every morning thinking about what can go wrong, and I am never surprised or disappointed." Let's be honest. There's some place in the middle. Now, the gentleman who said that to me is never going to have a stretch goal. He's never going to achieve anything great. He's right. He's never going to be disappointed. He's going to achieve greater things.
That's a great one. I'm glad that. So that's a wake up question.
Yeah.
So and the next topic it leads to it, and I think it's what we've been talking about: flexibility. How important is it to be flexible in our thinking or our doing, Doug?
This is one of the I would say one of the strengths. For your listeners, if they want to identify what their strengths are, go to viacharacter.org. It's not my website. It's run by the Mayerson Foundation. Actually, Marty Seligman and Chris Peterson originally developed that assessment. You probably know about it. Mm-hmm. And one of my top strengths is around this concept of trying to be open-minded, right? I'm not saying I always achieve this, but I do value this highly. And what I would say, the reason it contributes to resilience, particularly, let's look at the last 4-5 years, around how polarized we've come. And we are fighting a battle of truth, right? The real problem in our society has to do with facts. It's not the polarization, the stances that we have on a wall, guns, you name it, taxes, how much stimulus should go out there. It's, how we are demonstrating almost no flexibility by pointing a finger at the other side and saying they're bad guys, as opposed to saying, what is it maybe inside of me where I might be off, or my message is not being broadcast the right way. I think we become more resilient when we get closer to the truth, as opposed to trying to just be optimistic.
The truth, you can't handle the truth.
One of my favorite movies.
I couldn't resist. But there's great wisdom in what you said, because if we cannot agree on what's the fact is, then everything becomes an opinion, and your opinion is as valid as my opinion, and there can be no consensus. And I like the way you wove resilience into that, because part of that is also, and successful business people, successful in any walk of life, are highly resistant because they don't always win. One of the things that I know, I've talked to people who teach successful people is, and I'm sure you've encountered this, is people young in life need to encounter defeat of some sort, adversity. Otherwise, they live a charmed life that is not going to serve them well going forward. Do you have a perspective on that, Doug?
We have an epidemic of comfort in this country, right? Not speaking for everybody. I live in Loudoun County, Virginia, which is off and on is the wealthiest county in the country. Okay. I think we missed 2 years in the last 15 or something like that.
Those were tough years.
Yes.
Yeah.
The suicide and mental health issue in our high schools or in our schools is absolutely horrible. Yeah. And our ability to think more flexibly about things and deal and actually allow our children to fail. I read something, I can't quote the exact study, but somewhere in the mid-teens, it's actually good for kids to experience a fair amount of failure. Now, chronic adversity, right? Where I don't have enough food to eat, there's not enough money on the table, I'm being abused verbally or physically by parents. That's not what we're talking about. But I'm talking about my son doesn't make the varsity when he really wanted to, right? Or gets a B+ when he's had when she's had A's her whole life. That's okay. What are you going to do differently? How are you going to respond to this? How are you going to get up off the mat? Those kids do better when they get laid off because the company had a bad year. And we all know that that's going to happen. And when they're 28, 29, and 40.
Without question. I think it's almost to a T. Every senior executive I've ever worked with, and to a degree, has almost the same story, that they were pulled aside by a boss at some point in their career. They were individual contributors chiefly, or whatever, moving along. And they were told, yeah, what you're doing now is good, but if you don't stop doing this, you're going nowhere, or nowhere further in this organization. And it was the metaphorical 2x4 across the head that woke them up, and they made a life shift. They had dealt with that adversity, and it was it was an introspection, and they changed. And that's a form of resilience that only holds you in good stead later on. So.
Yes, agreed.
So you have something, because and this is something that's not talked about a lot, but is so important for leaders. Tell me about curiosity.
So, as we, tumble through time, when you look at the amount of knowledge that it took to be a software engineer, obviously there weren't that many of them in the early 70s compared to now. If you were an engineer, if you did anything, you were an executive, the knowledge turnover at that time was years, multiple years, right? Fast forward to now, if you're a software engineer and you're specifically working in artificial intelligence, the turnover in your field of all the knowledge may be a matter of months. It reinvents itself.
It's frightening. I mean, it's positive for the growth of the field, but for the human, it's frightening.
Yes. And I would say that is the case in almost all of the fields that we're in, because we've got these mass communication tools and people are learning at faster speeds than ever. And we're all adopting this experiment and fail quickly type of approach. We've got to be curious, because we should not be expected as leaders to have all the answers. It's okay, and it is encouraged to say, I don't know. You are giving permission to your organization for them to be curious. And, of course, now we're dipping into vulnerability, which, John, I know you're a fan of that. A professional level of vulnerability builds trust.
Without question. And I'm glad you touched on the idea of the overwhelming turnover of knowledge. And it raises something, because we're never going to cope with it's always going to, at least for the foreseeable future, it'll be the proverbial fire hose of information. It's how you take that information and what you do with it, is it not? So
it's how you take that information. Yes. So I do think, going back to self-awareness, one of the things that I've been working on with my clients over the last couple of years is, how do you make decisions? So how do you build that self-awareness around what your decision-making style is, what's appropriate for how you make decisions? And in fact, if I could take a pill to be a superhero executive, I would want that pill to make me the best decision maker, right? That to me that's the superpower. If you could have one superpower, it'd be great decisions. And that's where, with your curiosity, you've got to learn how to decipher the information. You got to learn about your own biases and put a process. I learned something a couple years ago that of a survey of some of the top ranked CEOs in the country. The one thing they all had in common with decision making, John, was not that they went A, B, C with their decision making. It was that they had an ABC. They had a process. Correct. Their processes were all over the map, but they had a process that they worked on, and they could learn from it. So this way they could look back and say, here's where I screwed up, as opposed to just looking at the results, because luck comes into every decision.
I liked what you did with this decision making, because I hadn't heard it framed this way. You wove in two key concepts. One was self-awareness. well, self-awareness, and then you defined it as both recognition of bias, but also process. And so tell me about the bias when it comes to decision making.
So, when it comes to decision making, we have short-term emotions that get in the way, right? So how I'm feeling right now, I might ask myself, is this a good time to make a decision? I might ask myself, what would future Doug think about this? One of my favorite tricks is, how will I feel about this decision in 10 minutes, 10 months, or 10 years, right? Try to build some objectivity. I would also, talking about biases, one of my favorite questions with a big decision is, what would I tell my best friend about to do right now, right? Because we're rarely objective with ourselves. And, the confirmation bias, of course, almost always has to come up. I think there's two major biases. One's the confirmation bias. Am I seeking out all information that confirms what I already believed? Right. And am I ignoring everything else? But then the other one is overconfidence. And that, when it comes to decision making, what I understand of the science is that overconfidence is actually the biggest mistake in decision making. So, right. So in that case, I say, how might I be wrong? What am I missing?
A key point. So if you encounter an executive who is overconfident, either self-admitted or you recognize by others, how do you deal with him or her? So.
I ask those questions in a way.
Well, I'm asking you. So
yeah. Well, that's what I do. Is I deal. That's how I deal with that executive, right? As you know, with coaching, our job is to be curious. Our job is to help them help themselves for the most part. I think it's okay for us to hold the mirror up, but that's one of the tactics I might use is, I might say, hey, John, if I were coaching you, you sound really confident about this decision. What do you think? What's the possibility that you might be wrong here? Or I might say, okay, you want to go with X as opposed to Y or Z. What are the chances? Give me a percentage, John, that X is going to happen. Give me the percentage that Y is going to happen, Z. Okay, what might come into play for Y and Z? So what are we missing? How is our planning not looking at all the information?
And when you go through that kind of process, do you see moments of awareness?
Yeah, right. So now that all this coaching is on Zoom and teleconference, right, there's the shoulders drop, the head drops, and there's the aha moment that you see on their face where they say, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. And as long as we're doing that, of course, in a safe environment where they're not being punished, it's a good thing.
I love that term. I hadn't thought about that, because that's one of the things I know that I'm reaching my clients. If I hear emotions like that, it means that I always say, Doug, my job is to get you out of your comfort zone, not because I want to make you feel uncomfortable, but because I want you to challenge your assumptions. So good job, Doug. So unfortunately, Doug, you've done such a good job that time has flown by. So I always ask my guests for an example of grace. And I know you have a story that you would like to share with us.
Yeah, it's a quick one and it's a powerful one. There was a woman who I did some subcontracting for. She's basically a client, one of my clients. And as I was going through my divorce, I realized after the first year of being on my own as a coach and a consultant that I was going to have to cut back on my travel. And I called her up and I said, Joy, I can't say yes that much this year. I've got to be with my kids. I got to coach their teams. I've got to be around. And I said, I understand if you're not going to ask me as much, because if I keep saying no, you might just not even pick up the phone anymore. And she said, Doug, I'm going to call you 1,000 times. You can say no 1,000, and then I'll call you 1,000 more. And that love, that belief in me was so powerful. I will never forget that. And I have thanked her multiple times.
Oh, that's great. Well, good for you. And what a gracious moment she showed. And she it was exhibiting grace when it mattered to you and it was important. And that's what grace does. We can consider it as catalyst for the greater good. And that's what she showed you. And so you were able to help her because satisfying her clients, your clients. So
Yep.
now, how can people find you, Doug? So,
I would say the two big places for me, the two easiest places are drhleadership.com. And the other one is, as you know, John, you've been on my podcast, it's called lookingforand.com. So both of those are good places to find me.
Great. When we will put your website in the notes for this program. Doug, you've been a terrific guest. And on behalf of everyone, I say thank you. So, and with that, we'll close.
Thanks.